Are we calling you Dan or Daniel on this?
Oh, it doesn't matter. You call me what you like.
I'll be whoever you want me to be.
Yeah, I can't decide half the time myself.
User Error 48. I'm Joe.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Daniel.
All right, so the reboot starts here. And let's start with a hashtag AskError. And remember, if you want to ask us stupid questions, we might well answer them. Use the hashtag AskError on social media, Twitter and Telegram, that sort of thing. So the first one is, what is the best bit and what is the worst bit about living the dream? Because now I am living the dream. Dan, you're running your own distro. That's pretty much living the dream. And Popey, you're working for a free and open source distro company. So we're all living the dream. So what's the best part of that?
Poverty.
No, that's the worst part.
Oh,
right?
Sorry. Got those mixed up. That's all I could think about.
Okay, well, for me, the best part is I never have to get up early. For the last few weeks that I've been doing this, only once did I have to set my alarm. That was to go to Odd Camp. And then I fucked that up well and truly when I got there and slept till lunchtime and didn't turn up till ridiculously late.
I do notice that when I message you on Telegram, the little tick doesn't light up. So I know you haven't seen it. You're almost certainly in bed. And I can anticipate that you're not going to read my messages until late in the afternoon. So thanks.
Well, yeah, I kind of wake up around lunchtime and read my messages. If you're going to live the dream, the thing is, if you're working with primarily American people and English people who have jobs like you, or Europeans who have jobs, then everything has to be done in the evening. And so I'm fucked if I'm going to get up early and then work late. So why not just stay up and be on American time?
Fair point. Living the dream. Well done.
So is there nothing good about it, Dan, like living the dream of running your own distro?
No, sorry. I got mixed up there. No, scheduling, like you said, is definitely really good as far as the flexibility. I've definitely got to spend a lot more time with my family and things like that than, I don't really have to put in for vacation and things like that. I could just say, hey, I'm going to be absent for this time. And so getting to have a better work-life balance, I think, is probably the biggest pro.
Yeah, I think for me, working from home is certainly beneficial, and not having to commute. I've done plenty of years of driving around the M25 and even further afield, and not having to do that, and my commute being walking into the kitchen, getting a cup of coffee and walking up the stairs and sitting down is most welcome. I think the other cool thing is working with cool people. Everywhere I've ever worked before, I've worked as a tiny, tiny cog in a giant corporation, and it's felt like nothing I did actually affected anything. Whereas working in a relatively small open source company, I work with a whole load of cool people, and that's very enjoyable. That's a satisfying part of the day.
And so Dan has already told us that the worst part is the poverty. And I think we might get back to that later on. But what about you, Popey? What's the worst part about it?
Worst part actually is partly a good thing. The good thing is so much of it is done in the open, but the bad thing is so much of it is done in the open that everyone is a critic.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone has reason to tell you you're doing it wrong. Whereas when I'm sat in my office, in previous jobs, I had a manager, and the only person who'd tell me I did something wrong was him. And he was the person responsible to make sure that I was kept in line and I did the right thing. Whereas when you're part of an open source project and there are people who believe they are stakeholders in your project from all far-flung corners of the world who have an opinion and a fully formed reckon on what you should be doing on a daily basis, that can be quite frustrating.
Well, especially when the things that they suggest are things that all of these failed projects do. They're like, why don't you do the same thing like all these projects that are completely unsuccessful? You're like, well, that's why I don't do that. We've done things differently because that doesn't work, when you do stuff like that. And people, like, they don't want to reason through it. They don't want to follow the why you've done things. They're just upset of like, why don't you listen to me?
Yeah, there's a lot of without wishing to get too negative, but you did ask. So there's a lot of people who feel like the decisions you make in an open source project just come out of your butt on a Monday morning, that there aren't well thought out plans and well thought out rationales for why you're doing things, but because they can't necessarily see those conversations that you happen to have, with other people on a Slack or an IRC channel they're not in. They think you're just making this stuff up as you go along, and that's often not the case. And that can be quite frustrating because you have to re-explain everything over and over again.
Well, I'm afraid I don't have anything bad about my dream so far, except for not being able to tell anyone about it. It's been so frustrating for the past few weeks. Like, I've only been able to tell a couple of people, and I've got so many people asking me what's going on, because I let a little bit of it out that I was doing full-time podcasting, and then just not being able to tell people has been such a nightmare. But now, due to the magic of time travel, you will know about this by the time you listen to it, but you're not when we're recording it, so it's still frustrating. So that's the only bad thing. Dockless bike sharing. This is a phenomenon that has been growing massively, at least in London, over the last few years. There are at least 2 different companies operating these. It started with the docked bikes, which were dubbed the Boris bikes originally, I think, which you have to take back to a certain place. But now you've got these ones that you just leave it wherever and use the app on your phone, and it's like £1 for an hour or whatever. Presumably, you do have these. Is it Sacramento where you live?
Yeah, so we're actually one of the cities who have the jump bikes, and it's like a Uber company, I suppose, and they're wildly popular here. I think they said they were going to bump up from their current supply to like 10,000 bikes or something.
What, are they motorized then?
They're like a hybrid, so they're part electric, right? They're like a moped, I guess.
Oh, right. And Popey, living out in the sticks where you are, you've probably never seen these except when you go into the office.
It's funny you should say that. I was in London on the weekend just gone, and I was walking along the north bank of the Thames, and I saw a bunch of homeless people hanging around, and then just after that I saw one of these bikes, and I thought this bike might belong to one of them because it looked really dilapidated, but also on second glance it looked relatively modern. I don't know which one it was. It had orange wheels, so I assume that's like the brand identity for one of them.
Yeah.
But it struck me that like this was near those Boris bikes, or Santander bikes as they are now, I guess. It was near them, but not in a dock. And I thought, that's weird. I'd never heard of dockless bikes. And I just thought it was a crap bike that someone had just dumped there. I didn't realize this was something I could, pick up and use and cycle off on. It just looked like a mess. It'd just been dumped there.
Yeah, well, at first I saw them while driving around, and I just kept seeing these orange bikes. I thought, who's dumping them there? And then I looked into it and realized, okay, this is dockless bike sharing. And then while drunk one night, I thought, right, I'm going to ride it for a bit. Got on, took about half a pedal, and then nearly went over the handlebars because obviously it's like designed to lock unless you unlock it with your phone or whatever. So don't do that, listeners.
So are they powered? They have some. I mean, all I know is I walked past one at the weekend, and that's as much as I know. Do they have some intelligence in them? Because they just look like a really basic bike.
Well, they must do, because you scan the QR code, I think, off them, and then it kind of pops open the lock that makes it actually be able to wheel. So they must have some sort of battery. I'm presuming that it charges while you ride. You wouldn't need that much of a battery to run basic stuff like that, I wouldn't have thought. I don't know how it communicates back to the servers and stuff.
Well, I would imagine the bike doesn't really need to communicate back.
It does, because it needs to do stuff regarding your fare, like if you want to hold it and stuff like that. Actually, the jump ones have a solar panel and a keypad and everything. I think you can do a card directly off of it or use a lock, or I don't know. I haven't actually used one, but yeah, but they have to communicate if they're in the service area and stuff like that, though, too.
Well, solar panels wouldn't work in this country because it's never sunny, but in California, it's kind of a different story.
So you've mentioned that they're just dumped. Are they? I mean, the one I saw was up on a kickstand, but do people line them up like they would be in Boris bike stands, or do people just literally just dump them in a pile?
They just literally leave them wherever. You're supposed to leave it on the stand, I think. But yeah, you just ride it to wherever you want, stick it back on the stand, and that's it. Yeah, just get on with your day.
There are places where you can line them up, but I see them all over the place. People just kind of lock them up in random places everywhere.
The problem in London, though, as I understand it, is that they don't have permission to go everywhere. So because London is divided into a set of boroughs, and they have different permissions in different boroughs. So actually, the bike will lock if you cross the boundary from one borough to another, or it will alert you and then start taking away credit if you take the bike outside of the boroughs that you're allowed to be in. I know that was the case. I don't know if it still is.
These ones, actually, they'll charge you an extra fee if you take it outside the service area.
So the big question is, are these actually good for society, good for the environment, good for people's health, or what? What do we think?
I mean, my kind of take on it is especially these ones that are an Uber company, they're kind of taking the stance of, if we don't cannibalize ourselves, someone else will, right? And I think that as far as taking the market away from other ride sharing services in the city, that it seems to be really effective. And I don't know. I think it's good for the city if the alternative is people doing ride sharing. It takes more cars off the street.
I think if there was dumping grounds, like not necessarily like as organized as the Boris bikes, but somewhere like an orange square painted on the pavement that they could be kind of haphazardly arranged in, then I would feel more comfortable if there were lots of those all over the place. But then that steals away public space from people just walking down the street, just as the Boris bikes have. Like, they make the pavement narrower by having the bikes there. So while it's useful, and I can see how the flexibility of being able to just grab one is very attractive, I'm less interested in them if they cause a mess and make the city just look like a bike dumping ground.
So in Sacramento, the city's actually gone the other direction, and instead of taking space away from the sidewalk, they're actually removing vehicle lanes.
Huh.
The city's been going really hard here on adding in protected bike lanes and things like that. So they're really working, I think, with these kinds of concepts and pushing the idea of Sacramento being more of a bike city.
But for me, the maths of this just doesn't add up, right? A bike like that has got to cost $100 whatever pounds at least, you would have thought, even at scale, because it's got some smart technology in it, and just to not completely fall apart on the first time. So let's just use 100 as the kind of benchmark here. And if it's roughly £1 a go, then you have to have 100 goes on it to break even, but not really, because you've got to pay for servers and staff and taxes and all the rest of it. So you're looking at 200 goes probably to even break even, and like 300 or 400 goes to make a profit, which you'd think, well, okay, it only takes an hour. You can do the maths of that. If it's used 4 or 5 times a day, then it's not going to take long at all. But
I think they're used way more than that.
Okay, well, even if they are, right, it doesn't really matter how long it is. It's how many goes they get. There's going to be wear and tear on them, and people are going to leave them places. They're going to get thrown around and damaged, and they're going to be in need of repair, right? And not to mention the fact that they are a lawsuit waiting to happen. I mean, presumably there must be something in the terms of service when you first sign up saying that you won't sue them, but people are riding around on these bikes on the roads, well, either on the pavements and running into pedestrians, or on the roads and running into cars and getting into potentially serious accidents because they've got no what we call PPE in this country, personal protective equipment. So, your high-vis jacket and helmets and pads and all that kind of stuff.
You don't have bike lanes.
We do, but in some places they're not ubiquitous. But that's not unique to these rental bikes. Like, I could go and buy a bike from Halfords, ride it into central London the wrong way down the road, and not have any personal protection equipment. It's not unique to that bike.
No, but that's going to cost you 100 or 200 quid to buy the bike. It's not going to cost you £1 with your phone right then and there when you're pissed.
Right, but the company that has my pound also has my credit card details or my PayPal account, and probably lots of other details about me that they could use in order to recoup the cost of the busted bike or the insurance claim for whatever it is I damaged along the way. They can recoup that from me. Why do they need to pay?
So do you think that there's any money? Is it a decent business model then?
Well, the ones here are $1 for 15 minutes, and they're in incredible demand. So I think they probably make a decent amount of money. If they've got 10,000 bikes going, even if they only had one ride a day.
Yeah, that's a lot of revenue coming in, but there are a lot of expenses, as I said, with the startup money to buying them in the first place. And
yeah, startup costs, sure. But I don't think they would be doing it if they weren't worried about the revenue from their other businesses?
They just do the usual, start off a pound an hour, and once everyone becomes dependent upon them, you start ramping the price up a little bit, or reducing the duration that you get the bike for.
Well, I have heard, accusations that it's essentially a license to steal money from venture capital companies, because you have this great idea, this startup, and you get a load of money from them, and then you don't really care about actually making any money. I mean, that's startup culture 101, isn't it? You don't necessarily make money. You just have growth.
Right. But then, also the model is based on, it's a round pound you pay for up to an hour, right? And if you go into the next hour, it's another pound. So surely, I can't imagine many journeys that I would take through London that would take me an hour. I would probably take the bike for a 15-minute ride, pay £1, and then someone else could pick it up and they get 2 bites of the cherry. So you might want to readjust your estimated calculation based on the fact that a bike actually gets paid for twice within 1 hour.
Yeah, ours are for 15 minutes, not an hour.
And even then, presumably, sometimes people don't have it the whole 15 minutes.
Right.
Right. So it could be quite lucrative. I don't have the numbers to hand, but it sounds like a reasonable venture to have a go at, and it seems popular around the world. So it's not like a unique thing to London or a unique thing to Sacramento. It's happening in multiple places.
Yeah, especially in China, where there's mass graveyards of these bikes because there was just too many people trying to do it at once.
Right, and we have some regulation that's the other end of the scale in London, where it's difficult for 1 or 2 companies to do this. So we don't have that problem. We may have other problems, but that's not one of them.
Travel is good for the soul. Who could argue with that, right? If you travel around the world and meet loads of cool, interesting people, go to cool, interesting places, you grow as a person, and it's just generally good for everyone. Popey, you travel around all the time. How many flights have you been on this year so far?
A few. I actually couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many countries I've been to this year. It's probably 3 or 4, not that many.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it because I'm being paid to do it, because my job requires me to go to these different places. It feels like your travel is good for the soul is more someone who's doing it because they want to see the world. They want to become a better person. They want to experience all the things that life has to offer. And I find those people utterly objectionable. I hate it when I stumble across one of these people who's been all around the world and all they want to do is just show you all their photos and will not shut up about this time when they were in Thailand or this lovely little place they found in Koh Samui or wherever. I hate it. I really do. I don't mind that people do that, and I think it's great that some people want to travel the world, but you don't need to tell me about it all the time.
Yeah, I think I have kind of the opposite problem where, I'm like you said, we're traveling for work and then people are asking me, oh, how was this country? Or what was that country like? And did you see this? Did you see that? And it's like, well, I spend most of the time, in a hotel or in a conference room or, and when I'm off of work, now I'm tired and it's like, well, I need to find a place to eat. And by the time that, you've gone through all your must-dos that day, you have, like an hour of downtime before you have to wake up and do it again.
I agree with you, but I feel like an awful person for saying that. I for many years, I've got taxis to the airport and the taxi driver will say something like, oh, where are you off to? And I'll tell them, and they'll say, oh, it must be lovely to go traveling around the world. And I spin them exactly the same story that you have. And they look at me like I'm some kind of ungrateful bastard because I'm being paid to go to like Copenhagen or New York or wherever it might be. And I'm so ungrateful that I'm not absorbing all of the culture in that location, when in actual fact what I'm doing is getting another taxi from the airport to the venue, sitting in the venue for 8 hours, then going and finding a bar somewhere and drinking with my friends, and then going to sleep. Like, that's basically what happens when I travel. I don't go and find some little off the beaten track hut where I can get some, cold pressed drinks and, sit watching the sun go down. Maybe I should, I don't know. But you don't tend to get that in Vienna and New York, where I go.
No, and I get that same thing from family too, where it's they kind of, they've never had the opportunity to travel outside of the US. And so for them, seeing me go to these places and then come back and saying, well, I didn't really get to like just travel. I'm here for work. That's it's tough to kind of relay that to other people.
Okay, so you guys have traveled quite a lot for work, but you have presumably traveled for pleasure as well and take every possible opportunity to do so.
Okay, yeah. So, I'll take a holiday and take the kids on holiday. But I'm not one of these hippie types who's converted a transit van into somewhere where I can go traveling across Europe with the kids and, live off of beans for a month so that I can travel through France and Spain and go down to Morocco or whatever. I go to a holiday destination like 90% of Brits, and I spend my time relaxing, away from work, not thinking about work, and sitting on the beach and chatting to friends and having pizza and the kind of things normal people do. I think it's more common and probably boring and probably tedious to some people who, would much rather see the world and go somewhere completely different. I've gone to the same city multiple times in successive years on holiday because I like it there. I don't go to the same place every year, but I have been to the same place a couple of times with the family because they like it. We know all the facilities are. Maybe I'm not adventurous enough. I don't care. I enjoy it. So screw you.
Yeah, I feel like we have a similar story.
Okay, but there is this axiom that traveling is good and you should go to as many places as possible. And there are a lot more, I think, of those people, those hippie people that you've described, Popey, that want to tell you about going to Thailand and everything, right? But why is it that the kind of people who love to travel around, whether it is for work or, you could argue have to travel around for work or love to travel for pleasure to see cool places, why is it that those are the very same people who claim to care about climate change the most?
Well,
there's the twist.
Well, they might be. I mean, I have a friend who I worked with, and he would always take the method of transport that made the least impact whenever he came to a canonical event. I think on one occasion we had an event in the States and he got a ship across. He just paid the minimal amount to sit on board a container ship across the Atlantic.
Didn't that take weeks?
It took a while, yeah. He got a talk out of it as well with photos of him laying on a sun lounger on the deck. And when traveling in Europe, he would use the train rather than fly wherever possible. So it is possible. And yeah, there are some people who take their environmental impact into account when they travel.
But they are few and far between.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, do you ever think about that when you're sitting on yet another plane?
No, never.
Will you in future?
No, because that's only one part of my life. It's like, I do my recycling and sometimes I put glass in the wrong bin, whoops. I also sometimes drive a little bit fast, which consumes more fossil fuels than I really should. And, sometimes I let the hot tap run a little bit too long in the sink and I leave the cold tap running when I'm brushing my teeth and I overfill the kettle. Yes, flying is a bad thing and I probably should do less of it. But there's a whole shitload of other things I should probably do less of as well. And I haven't fixed all of those yet. So, stop beating me up about that one thing, right?
Did the CO2 emissions from flying outweigh eating meat?
I think having children is probably a bigger impact. And I've got 2 of those. So, it doesn't matter what I do. I could be the best hippie who unwraps everything at the supermarket and, doesn't take any plastic home and has the minimal impact. But the fact that I've punched out 2 kids, negates half of that. So what can I do?
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff, not too long ago about the drought in California and people saying, oh, conserve water, don't water your lawns and all this when, yeah, okay, but the majority of the water usage was all from agriculture. So how much CO2 really does flying put out? I'd like to see some comparisons on, is that really a super effective way to reduce your emissions as an individual?
Right. And I think the counter argument is you can't just give up, throw your hands in the air and say, well, I'm not going to do anything because that little bit it doesn't have a significant enough impact. So I'm just going to give up and not do anything. I think that's probably the wrong answer. And we're probably getting emails right now from people saying exactly that to me. Fair enough.
But we have the technology. You see, all these trips that you have to go on for work, right? It's like that old adage that I survived another meeting that could have been an email. And, I survived another business trip that could have been a 2-hour VoIP call.
No, I completely disagree with that. There's so much value to in-person time that you're never going to be able to replicate with remote work. Like, as a remote worker, it's just not the same at all. I can get like a month's worth of design work done in like a couple hours at a whiteboard in person with someone.
Yeah.
I've got 2 letters for you. VR.
No, well, for VR to work, everyone has to use it. But it doesn't work because you need to be in person to be able to have those corridor conversations, or to stumble into a room where a conversation is happening and pick up on something and say, oh, that's a great idea, and take that back and work on it. Or, go to an event. Like, for example, I went to Academy a couple of weeks ago, and there was a conversation being held in a room where they said, oh, we don't know how to deal with this thing. And I said, well, you have the data. Here it is. But they didn't know they had access to this information. And if I hadn't been in the room, like happened to have wandered into the room and heard that conversation, there's no way they would have known that. So, and there are countless examples of those kind of corridor conversations and impromptu things that happen. And it's one of the things we used to have at Ubuntu Developer Summits that people really miss, was that in-person corridor conversation that you would have with people that would progress things way further than an email thread or IRC or video chat or whatever you want to call it.
The hallway track.
That's it, the hallway track.
Okay, another hashtag AskError. This is just a quick one, and it's tangentially related to the last one. Talked about living the dream. Well, how do you go to sleep? Do you go to sleep in silence? Do you listen to podcasts, or do you listen to music?
Definitely silence. Silence, all the lights off. I want to be in a sensory deprivation chamber.
Do you go as far as earplugs and face mask if it's noisy and bright?
No, because I don't want anything to touch me.
Fair enough.
I have for many years listened to stuff when I go to bed, but because I have a partner who has no taste, she can't listen to the same things that I listen to. So I put one ear in, the ear that's pointing upwards, and the other ear down in the pillow. And for many years, I had a iRiver MP3 player. And I had it full of BBC radio comedies like Mitchell and Webb, The Consultants. I had all of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on there, loads of audiobooks and stuff. And I would just pick something almost at random, hit play, put one earphone in, and fall asleep listening to that. And I've got used to that. And that's pretty much every night now. I'll either put a podcast on, or if I'm not in the mood to be intellectually engaged with a podcast, I'll listen to either an audiobook. I've listened to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Dirk Gently hundreds of times. I've lost count. And I know all of the Mitchell and Webb sketches inside out as well. So yeah, I listen to spoken word, not music, every night.
Yeah, well, unsurprisingly, I listen to podcasts as well, and I'm exactly the same as you. One ear on the pillow, one earbud in. And that's why all my podcasts are in mono, and why I told you that yours should be in mono as well, but you fucking make me do it in stereo like a twat.
Fair point.
So a very simple question. Will desktop Linux ever make money? Dan, you are trying your very best with Elementary OS to do that. Popey, you have worked for a company who is arguably making money, or I think is making money from deals with the likes of Dell, and has tried the App Store model and stuff before. So you're somewhat jaded and experienced. But Dan, I get the feeling you're going to argue with this premise in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that will desktop Linux ever make money? Yeah, we already do make money off of only desktop Linux. Elementary is fully bootstrapped. We've never taken any loans. We don't have any enterprise deals or royalties or anything like that. We don't have any server products, or we just sell our operating system to normal people, and that has allowed us to run a payroll. And so, yeah, done. Next topic.
One of your developers does have to run a GoFundMe to get a laptop to work on, though, to be fair. So you can't be making that much.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not something that necessarily has to be done, but it definitely is a huge help. Like, the more things that we can crowdfund, the better, because then we could, pay for like travel and things like that. So it's like, well, can we go to Guadec, or can we buy a computer? So the more crowdfunding that we can do, and the more fundraising, like we're continuously fundraising, and we have multiple fundraising streams.
And you're not shy about asking for money and making money. You, I think, are, if not unique, you are certainly unusual in the desktop Linux space, or Linux generally and open source, that you are just not shy, not backwards and coming forwards when it comes to money, right?
No, not at all. I mean, this is my job. This is the same as if you walked into a restaurant and you're like, you're not really shy about asking for money, are you? Kind of look at you like, no, should I be?
And so, probably without going into too much corporate secret stuff, Canonical does make money off the desktop, right?
So I don't work in the desktop team, and I'm not privy to financial details, but yeah, we were lucky in that, from my perspective, we were lucky that we had a benevolent person who kicked off the project and decided to fund the thing in the first place. So yeah, we're very lucky in that regard. Anyone who's starting a Linux distro now and starting with zero financial input is going to have a hard time. We were very lucky that someone injected a huge amount of money to get us bootstrapped to where we are now. But where we are now is we have a desktop that funds the team that makes it. As a division within the company, the desktop is profitable. So yeah, will desktop Linux ever make money? I would agree with Dan. Yeah, it does make money. It already does. And people might not like the fact that Canonical make money and that funds the development of Ubuntu and contributions to other projects as well. But that's the reality of it. And I wouldn't apologize for that, because if we didn't make money, we wouldn't be able to fund the continuing development of Ubuntu and all those other derivatives that depend on the infrastructure that we have, like Launchpad and like all those build machines and the bug tracking tools and all the other bits and bobs that we have that makes Ubuntu and all the derivatives work. Wouldn't be possible if we didn't continue to make the desktop and continue to make money, which we do.
Right. And in the same vein, I would say the same thing about us. And, if we weren't a company that makes money, then we wouldn't have been able to kick off App Center. And now we have over 100 new native GTK3 apps that people are using, not just in Elementary OS, but, they're showing up on FlatHub and other places, being distributed to all kinds of Linux desktop users. And that's completely powered and funded and provided by, people paying for our desktop operating system.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was going to bring it up as well. Specifically, there's a parallel there with what Canonical tried with the Ubuntu App Store, and that seemingly didn't work out well. Otherwise, we'd still have it.
There's a lot of reasons why that didn't work out well.
Finances must have been one of them.
But it's not just a case of, we didn't sell enough apps, therefore shut it down. If you look deeper, it was actually hard to package apps, to get them into the paid app store. And the focus was on getting any app in the store. It wasn't getting high quality apps in the store. It wasn't getting the best of breed Linux apps in the store.
I'm hearing parallels here. Snap install. Or is that an outrageous claim that you're not just getting any old Snap? It's all about getting the high quality ones.
Yeah. Like, I've spent the last year with the team I work with talking to high quality software vendors. We don't, the Spotify, Slack, those kind of people, the Skype developers, they didn't just like magically happen out of nowhere. We worked hard to talk to those people about the advantages of putting the software in the store. And once they appreciated what we were talking about, they did it. And we didn't have that all those years ago when we had the desktop app store, where there were a whole load of Mickey Mouse applications, frankly, not particularly high quality, that were difficult to package and difficult to update. The process was awful, and it was just not a great place to be in. Whereas when you look at what Daniel and Elementary are doing, they're streamlining the process. They've got a high barrier for quality control and a good process for getting your applications updated and installed on end user systems. And that's something we didn't have back then. So yeah, we're not redoing what didn't work. We've learned from that and doing it differently.
Yeah, and I think that the technology in general and the kind of landscape and ecosystem was completely different at that time too. I mean, we leverage a lot of existing technologies, things like AppStream for metadata, right? Just that, is a huge benefit for us. But we also leverage like GitHub as a platform in a huge way. And we use Stripe and Stripe Connect for all the payment processing and tax reporting and like things that I'm sure that were a lot more manual when Canonical tried this Ubuntu store. Yeah.
We also had the problem that the payment processing system we used had a minimum spend of like some ridiculously high value that meant that people couldn't put inexpensive little utilities in the store. The amount of effort you had to put in to get your app in the store, the reward that you would get isn't worth it because nobody would pay the amount, for that application. And the onus was on us to help you package it and get it in the store. And so we were blocking all these applications. It was not a happy time. And yeah, we've learned from that and we're not doing that again.
And how close are we to getting to paid snaps then? The likes of, I don't know, Adobe or whatever, because at the moment, the big proprietary ones that you've got are all like freemium, aren't they? Like Spotify and, or just free to use. But when you get to a stage where you've got apps that are paid for and you need to buy the license or whatever, how is that going to work? Is it going to be like you buy the license on the website and just enter the code in and it's otherwise free to download the snap, but it's just useless if you don't have the license?
So we allow, apps in the store that already have a payment system. So you said Spotify and Slack is another good example. They already have their
in-app payments.
Well, it's either in-app payments or you go to their portal and you pay and, you get a service fee or a subscription service or whatever it is. And yeah, we'll have the ability to pay for snaps outright. So the kind of Steam model where you go to the store and you press a button and you give them your PayPal details and you pay, or whatever the payment system is. That's all been developed, but it's not ready yet. Some of the pieces are finished, but the entire end-to-end user experience isn't polished enough for us to release it yet. So we're not ready for paid apps right now. I think that will come probably later in the year, maybe next year. I don't see that coming within the next couple of months. But that's fine because right now there are plenty of apps in there that are free and people can have subscription or paid systems that are off-site. That's fine.
And so, Dan, of the downloads that you have, I mean, I presume you must have fairly detailed stats on this. Of the people downloading these pay-what-you-want apps, how many of them are actually paying? I mean, it must be less than 1%, right?
Yeah, the last time I checked it was less than 1%. So we got the downloads of the operating system up to about 1%, but the apps I think are still like 0.1% or something. It's pretty low.
And do you ever share figures for like how many, what that 1% is of, or is that a trade secret?
You mean like gross revenue?
Well, no, what I mean is how many people download it, and of, you say 1% pay for it. But 1% of how many? Like, are we talking 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, million?
I don't have that off the top of my head, actually. But it's definitely less than 1 million. I think the latest estimates we have is like it's like a couple 100,000 users, and not all of them are downloading apps from the store. So it's probably in the tens of thousands.
And Elementary is a like superbly popular distro. The vast majority of distros out there have way fewer users than Elementary.
Yeah, well, there's a tangential question. What is more popular in terms of users? Okay, not more popular. What is used more in terms of desktop users, do you think? Like Ubuntu, Mint, Fedora, Elementary? I mean, where?
That's a hard question to answer. You know that.
I know it's a hard question, but what are your feelings on it?
If I gave you my feelings, you would say I'm coming from a biased position. And
so obviously Ubuntu #1.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty certain Ubuntu is probably the most used Linux distro on. If you're talking about the desktop,
yeah,
as this segment is, then yeah, I'd say probably Ubuntu is the #1 distro on the desktop.
From what I understand, too, by a really, really wide margin.
Why is it that Mint is, I hate to cite DistroWatch, but...
Oh, my God.
But it's okay. Not just that. Anecdotally, people who first try Linux, they hear about this Linux thing, they tend to find Mint first rather than Ubuntu.
Do they?
I've no documentary evidence for that, but that's the feeling that I get.
Do they really? Like, I think it depends when they found Linux, right? You got to remember that a few years ago, we were sending free CDs to people, and you could give them out to your friends, and there were thousands of those things given out. And a lot of people's first introduction to Linux was one of those CDs that they got from the Ship It service. Now, we haven't done that for a few years now, but there's still a huge number of people whose first gateway into Linux was using Ubuntu from a free CD or a CD that was on the cover of a magazine. Now, the people who really love the distro they run tell their friends. And there are quite a few vocal people who use Linux Mint who tell their friends, you should use Linux Mint. And that's fine. And there are a lot of vocal people who use SUSE because they love Yast or they love Snapper or they love Zipper or whatever it is that they love about that distro, they tell their friends. And depending upon who you listen to, you might hear cheering for Elementary or SUSE or Fedora or Ubuntu. But the raw numbers, generally, Ubuntu is, I would say, probably higher than most of the others.
Well, the thing that makes me question that is, the guy who was writing for Forbes, Jason something, I can't remember his surname.
Yep.
He said that he tried Mint first after just Googling for it, and he just seems like a normal user. He's obviously fairly techie because he had a gaming PC, so he knew enough about how to install it. But Linux Mint was his first port of call. It didn't happen to see his disk for whatever reason. It was missing the driver or whatever. And that's when he tried Ubuntu second. And that's what makes me wonder, like, how popular Mint really is, because they kind of, because Clem is just not interested in coming out and doing interviews and stuff, we don't really seem to talk much about them. But I see so many people using it.
He's got a very enthusiastic user base, and he's got a desktop that lots of people love to use, and it works. So why would you not sing the praises of Linux Mint? You know, it's built on a foundation of Ubuntu, and that's built on a foundation of Debian. So it's got all the right solid foundations underneath it, like many derivatives. And it's got a desktop that people find appealing. And why would you not tell your friends and write blog posts and make YouTube videos about how great Linux Mint is? So when new people come along and they search for, what Linux should I try, Linux Mint is one of the ones that pops up in the list for sure.
Mint does publish their donations number, right? So if we just go by revenue, I think that you could probably make a case that Mint is maybe twice as popular as Elementary OS. But last I checked, I think Ubuntu has like hundreds of times as many installs as Elementary OS.
So really, Mint's install base is a piss in the ocean compared to Ubuntu.
I don't know. I don't know that it's that small, and I wouldn't describe it as that. I'd say they clearly, they have people shipping hardware that runs Linux Mint. They certainly don't have as many devices as Ubuntu have shipping in the wild, like big tier 1 companies like Dell, Lenovo, and others who are shipping machines that have it out the box, that helps as well. It's not just a case of someone Googling, what Linux distro should I try? But if people actually go onto a web store, they might see, a laptop running Ubuntu on a Dell website, which helps us to sell the product because there's a big name behind it. It's not just some random 2-bit distro made by some guy in his garage. It's actually got some corporate backing, which some people find has greater weight, whereas other people prefer community distros, which don't have corporate backing, like Linux Mint. Each to their own.
I would guess that Ubuntu probably has more users running it that don't know what Ubuntu is than Linux Mint has users total.